we have the tools that we need already, and we have the most incredible potential to redesign these systems, to use the most advanced technology to unite people around the globe and connect us and really build a movement that can create the next generation systems, the next global order that's going to hopefully take this planet forward in a way that's not only sustainable but regenerative, actually improving and getting better as a coordinated whole.
Yo, what is good, ReFi Nation? It's been a while. ReFi Podcast is finally launching Season 3 after many months of going deep to really look at the institutions, the infrastructure, and the behavior change that we need to make to realize this vision of a regenerative future. Today in this episode, we're going to cover a lot of ground, welcoming new listeners to the show who haven't been there for Season 1 and Season 2, and laying the framework for our current hypothesis around how the regenerative finance movement can play a pivotal role in the transition to a regenerative economy. We'll welcome in a special guest, my friend and co-founder, Monty Merlin, and we're going to have lots of fun here today, but we're also going to touch on some deeper topics. I myself have been going through a major life transition, and while I won't go into the depths of the weeds, I will talk a little bit about the lotus that has emerged from this murky time, the hardest work there is of doing the work within. So thanks for tuning in and joining us. If you're new to the ReFi movement, welcome. It is so very good to have you. We'll lay out a little bit of a structure for our time together today. First, talking about this brand, Source Studios, that we have launched, inspired by the work of Bankless and the network of content creators that they have been producing, but with a completely different vision in mind, of a community-owned network of storytellers all around the earth, committed to the vision of regeneration in every language and every corner, gathering people online and in person to do the work in the heart and to do the work in the soil, because we see them much as the same. We'll introduce the outline for Season 3 and bring on Monty to talk about the tipping point, this current moment in our history, where we are today, and the diverse canvas of possibilities that have arisen that give us hope of a better world that we can build together. We'll talk about this new story that we see emerging as we gather every single month in Lisbon and in dozens of cities all around the world, alongside other amazing networks like Regens Unite and Greenpill, HerDAO. There's a true phenomenon emerging as online communities gather, create a moral innovation, and then produce content, produce public goods, and take action in person. Lastly, we'll look at the ReFi movement as a whole, its past and its trajectory, and we'll give a residing call to action for leaders of the new earth who are waiting to join a movement that gives them a deep sense of purpose and provides not only the capital, but also the tools and the culture to build what we all need to survive. And not only to survive, but actually to thrive as a living, integral part of Earth, not as some freaking parasite that's trying to be exscourged. For those who don't know me, my name is John Ellison. I've been building startups for quite a while, had a great pleasure of building civic tech solutions at Peak Democracy, which was acquired by OpenGov, set up a permaculture community in the UK, done the hard work of putting my hands in the soil and realizing that I'm actually really bad with atoms. I'm so much better with bits, but I tried, I tell you what, with chickens and bees and sheep and everything in between, really trying to live out this regenerative livelihood and actually be in deep and right relationship with others as we look not only how to build regenerative financial systems, but also family and social systems within the home, within our neighborhoods, within our cities. I've had the great pleasure of building high-tech, hyper-growth startups, as well as small local businesses that are working on the ground at a very humble level. And ultimately, thanks to KlimaDAO and Toucan Protocol, I fell in love with what is known today as ReFi, short for regenerative finance. I think this movement has so much potential, and at the end of the day, it just feels really good to belong in a movement of people that care deeply about the planet, deeply about one another, and have a firm conviction about making the world a better place, not just for us and not just for their children, but for 7 generations or more to come. So if you haven't listened to the podcast, check out the episode, What is ReFi? And tune in, get on the stream, and start making contributions. So a quick recap of what we've done together. We've produced over 30 episodes, reaching almost 100,000 people all around the world. First season supported so heavily by the folks at Gitcoin and also Toucan Protocol with John X really helped me get into this space as I was new really to climate finance and to Web3, but I dove in deep and found myself at home. With season 2, we did 12 episodes with Simmer Mangit and more, supported by Climate Collective and Cello Foundation, looking at some of the top emerging projects at this intersection, like Flow Carbon, Regen Network, Moss. We had a great time talking to the pioneers of this movement, but also saw the emergence of a really voracious bear market. We stuck in some bonus episodes throughout the year as we really grappled with this new concept of a network state, or a coordination, as we're looking at these days, and seeing how do we actually gather, how do we take these ideas in the cloud, these bits, these smart contracts, and put them to work in the soil, in the water, and in the oceans of the earth that we have, because this really is all that there is. And we've been building season 3 at a deep capacity, but it's taken us a bit of time. And the reason why we've been quiet is because we've seen that my entry into this space as a desiring, budding storyteller is just a microcosm of leaders all around the world who have a vision of a better future for all of life, not just for humans, but for all of life. And we truly want to empower these storytellers to stand up and to become leaders and to compel people to act and really tell the stories of regeneration that are happening on the ground in every corner of the earth and in every single language. And it's with this framing that I'm really excited to introduce Source Studios. This network of content creators, thankfully supported by Cello and Climate Collective in Portuguese, Spanish, and now 2 shows in English. We really see this as an initial foundation, a milestone, to shape a new human story and really invite communities all around the world to participate in this regenerative economy. We've got my show and also Chad Frischman, the founder of Project Drawdown, and 2 other shows, one in Portuguese and one in Spanish. And we really do want to create a community-owned network, a media entity that can actually serve the needs of this community and grow with it in all the diverse ways that regeneration is being expressed in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, because it really does look different in every place. And yet there are some incredibly powerful themes and resonant structures that are emerging as we look at the movement from all the edges and all the lenses possible. So a quick overview of season 3. We've got 3 mini-series, first on Latin America, the second on Europe and North America, and then the third on Africa. We'll talk to high-profile influential leaders in each of these regions, projects that are making an incredible difference, and also ReFi DAO local nodes that are gathering monthly to take action and regenerate the earth in their local context with a network of other leaders who are doing the same. We'll pause and try a new experimental format that we're calling regenerative stories that are going deep into the work of the heart and finding people who are making that pivotal transition from being an investment banker to being a natural capitalist, from being somebody who's floundering around looking for purpose and meaning to voraciously working for food forests on the ground. We'll look at the inspiring moments of the human heart transitioning from an extractive mode of being to a regenerative society. Because really, this is what we are all being invited to do every single day that we are alive. And the frank matter is that not many of us really know how. We're learning there together. And so we hope by going deeper into the human stories that are making this transition, we can provide a trail of clues that make it easier for people just like you and me to make one step after another into this regenerative future that we're all dreaming about together. We've also starting to open up slots for paid episodes and sponsorship opportunities, really seeing this as actually a commercially viable business to tell the story of impact that everyone so desperately wants to tell without greenwashing and full of publicly verifiable proof as we use public ledgers to demonstrate the goodness that we are creating in the world. And before I bring on Monty, I just wanted to pause a little bit and share a few moments from the last 6 or 7 months of my life. I've somehow, out of nowhere, become somewhat well-known in the ReFi space, even though it is a bubble, and I love this bubble. But it's been a really interesting transition of being a startup founder, looking for my niche, and finally finding it, working at Toucan Protocol, and seeing enormous amounts of capital flow on chain, over $4 billion of volume in less than 6 months, over 5% of the entire voluntary carbon market in a matter of days. And it did something to my being. There was a lot of adrenaline. There was a lot of cortisol. There was a lot of money around. And what I saw was something that was truly startling, both in my own heart and in others. The recognition that actually, I did come into ReFi with a deep allure to make money. That yes, I wanted to make an impact, but I was also tainted with greed. And that sometimes these two motivations cannot work together. One does have to come after the other. And as I was grappling and reconciling with my own motivations and my own heart, as I deployed capital towards impact but was really seeking returns, I felt this cascade of awareness into every fabric of my being, not only my work, but also my life, as I looked at myself in the eyes, my children, as I looked at my wife and wondered what all this is for. Seeing the suffering in the world that we've inflicted upon our neighbors as privileged people in the global north with so much prosperity, with so much consumption, and looking at our neighbors, refugees, suffer from the impact of our life's decisions, and witnessing this multi-generational cascade of trauma that's coming into all of us through the lives that our parents and their parents have lived, the tragedies of war and colonialism that are embedded into every fabric of society, that are interwoven into culture, the masculine dominant generational trauma that has been enforced upon our sisters, our mothers, our grandmothers, our daughters. This is real, and yet somehow it feels intimately intertwined to the problems we're trying to solve in the finance space. Why does this matter? Why does the human heart relate to the money that we make? How do our emotions relate to the decisions that we take on a day-to-day basis? How does our feeling, our sense of self relate to the way that we treat our neighbors or our enemies or our friends? And what I realized along this process was that actually I was living in some ways a lie. And I wasn't intimately and infinitely true to myself. And as I looked into the heart to do the deepest work that there is, I recognized that there was an enormous amount of work to do. And in doing this and recognizing what I actually needed as a human, my entire life fell apart. And I've had to rebuild this from scratch in terms of who I am and what I need and what I believe in. And so now I have the opportunity and the chance here in Lisbon with a new studio connected to studios all around the world, meeting monthly to redefine what family means, to welcome in the lost and the broken, to take in the leader who thinks they've got it all figured out and show them the work of the heart alongside the work of the earth, to see a new culture emerge as we not only take action by planting trees, but we take action by facing our shadows. And this is what I believe has the truest and most powerful potential to change the trajectory that we are on, to realize this vision of a regenerative future. And that's why I'm here. I know that's why you're here too, Monty. Thanks, Monty, for coming on the show again, twice in quick succession. It's great to have you in Lisbon. I would love for you to do just a quick introduction for those who don't know you, a bit about your background, and then we can jump into things, man.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for having me. Good to be here on season 3. And yeah, really excited to see more of the stories that we're going to see emerge from all of these communities and really try and fulfill the potential of ReFi. And I think it has been such an interesting journey, and so excited to see how that all develops and where we can take it from here. A little bit about me. I've grown up in rural Dorset in the UK in a kind of wonderful family of passionate environmentalists, and it's been a really fortunate kind of upbringing to be talking about these issues from a very young age in a kind of safe space to be able to, come up with my own ideas and form opinions and explore these concepts in a really supportive environment. So I feel very, very fortunate for that. I've got 2 older brothers. One's an artist and designer out in Rotterdam, and one's a circular economy entrepreneur, my eldest brother. And really all of that has come from some amazing female leadership from my mum, really, and of course my dad. But yeah, so my mum's been an environmentalist for 30, 40 years now, as a campaigner, an author. She's written nearly 20 books. Many of them, some of them have sold 1 million copies.
What's her name? Drop the name.
Julia
bro.
Hales, yeah. And now, most recently, we've been doing this huge Rewilding project at my family home as well, all of this land totally rewilded with wildflowers, nature, insect habitats. And in a very short space of time, the amount of species and wildlife and emergence that we've seen has been incredible. And so now we're hosting a yearly kind of festival that's bringing in all of the other local people and surrounding and really inspiring people to go and do this in their own homes. Went to university in Bristol. I studied a 4 years integrated management with innovation course, which was awesome. Like a lot of experimentation with startups and the methodologies of lean and agile, but then combining that with some solid theory in economics and management and bringing in my technology and real creative freedom to explore these contexts in an academic context, but also actually to do the work, practically launching startups, seeing what it's like, failing, rebuilding, getting diverse teams together. And so it was an awesome experience. And in my final year, my master's project, instead of writing a dissertation, you launch a startup for a year, you form a team, and you build. A combination of all my interests. I'd been a technologist, interested in economics and philosophy, so kind of crypto had always been interesting to me, but it never had that environmentalist side to it, and in fact, like quite the opposite. And so really, in my final year of university was when this ReFi movement was born, and this craziness that happened with Klima and Toucan Protocol and all of this energy and the kind of movement that was born from that, I found absolutely fascinating. But no one knew about it. Everyone still thought crypto was this, when I could see that the technology could be used for this. And so, I ended up doing a TED Talk, and that's how we kind of touch base with all the awesome work that you're doing on the ReFi podcast and the blog and the founder circles that were emerging to really have a container for all that mimetic energy that was coming in. Since then, we've obviously just worked closer and closer together.
It's so fun.
And it's gone from people power to ReFi DAO, and we're doing this whole coordination. Let's go.
Let's do it, man. Awesome. Well, it's great to have you on. I'd love to get your take. Like, I feel as though you have a slightly different lens on things, given your background. Like I grew up in a sort of fundamentalist evangelical Christian household. Like climate change was not a thing.
Very different from my household, I can tell you that.
Right wing as right wing gets, and we had all of our needs met, but everyone was, depressed in society, and everyone's committing suicide left, right, and center, and shootings like crazy. So I feel like we've come from different backgrounds, even though we kind of look like each other, young white men, privileged as it gets. But yeah, what's your take on kind of where we are now in society? It feels like we've reached kind of an environmental and systemic tipping point. Like, how do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, it can get quite terrifying. I think a lot of people, maybe they don't trust or they don't see the where we're actually at, and I think that a lot of people actually almost underestimate the kind of situation that we're in. There's a wonderful documentary called Breaking Boundaries with Sir David Attenborough, a big inspiration, of course. But it's pretty terrifying to see these Earth global systems and to see that we're actually already past the boundaries where we're reaching these dangerous tipping points, where at any moment a cascading effect of runaway impacts that become very difficult to contain and go back to where we were, if not impossible. And the impact is potentially huge. And every day that we waste in not doing that, we had, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if we really put in the work, it would be so much easier now. So with each passing day, it becomes more challenging. And so there's that side of it, but there's also the side of, we have the tools that we need already, and we have the most incredible potential to redesign these systems, to use the most advanced technology, to unite people around the globe and connect us and really build a movement that can create the next generation systems, the next global order that's going to hopefully take this planet forward in a way that's not only sustainable but regenerative.
Yes.
Actually improving and getting better and as a coordinated whole. So
yeah, and I think the introduction of planetary boundaries as opposed to just rising emissions is a fascinating model. Joe Brewer in his book really heavily leans on this framework as a way to say SDGs are kind of this cacophony of categories of impact and action, and they're actually sometimes incongruous to each other. And so ESG seems to be kind of built upon a scaffold that doesn't really have the integrity we need, whereas planetary boundaries are almost describing very physical containers that we can observe this Earth system needs to be in check in order for us to survive. Yeah. And they described like, hey, there's these 9 planetary boundaries, and if even one of them is crossed, like, this is an existential threat for life on Earth.
Carbon's just one.
Carbon's just one, and yet we've crossed 4. And we're looking at 5 and 6 as well, out of 9.
Yeah.
And so we really are at a fundamental moment in human history where we have pushed beyond the boundaries of this earth. And now what happens, right? And I think this is the most fascinating moment because we're now in a post-truth society with deepfakes and artificial intelligence alongside the breaking of these planetary boundaries. You look at what happened with COVID-19, you think that was bad. That was a threat that could kill maybe 1% of all humans.
Yeah.
How about 20?
Yeah.
How about 30? How about 50? You know, these are kind of numbers that we cannot fathom until it becomes real. And, you know, you and I were just walking down the street talking about this, and then we look into a cafe, and what's on TV? Raging forest fires. Every summer now. Heat waves and death. Like, this is a part of our life now. This isn't a fiction.
The hottest summer so far, but maybe the coldest summer of our lives.
Oh, God. Our lives ahead. And so, like, this is terrifying. It really is. And I think it is clear that our time is running out as a species. And there is this gloom narrative, but actually I completely want to rewrite this narrative because the reality is we've designed this entire system ourselves. We've made these choices consciously or unconsciously to optimize for a single metric, that of gross domestic product, that has no awareness of water or soil or carbon or life. It's completely disconnected. And as a result, we've traded the pristine living waters of nature and the vibrant living ecosystems that sustains itself. It's just regenerative. You know, everything else except for humans just regenerates. You leave it alone, it's fine. Humans. We traded all of that for the convenience of single-use plastic. And look what it's done to our countrysides. And look what it's done to ourselves. You know, we're eating more than a credit card of plastic a week simply because it's endemic and systemic. And also as human beings, the way we relate is fundamentally changed. We used to sit around fires and share stories. You described it in the last episode, like, you know, having conversations around a dinner table. Being this formative practice that shaped your identity. And now, what are the youth of today doing? They're swiping on their phones alone, in their own room, in this echo chamber that tells them that they are never enough. And of course, suicide and depression and anxiety are at an all-time high. Of course, we are deeply unwell because we're not only disconnected to each other, but we're actually disconnected to ourselves. We're disconnected from nature. And so I think this, to me, has this, like, really deep, horrifying resonance, and yet you and I seem to have hope. And I'm curious, like, what is this narrative that you see that really propels us forward towards, you know, waking up every morning and making a difference?
I think what really excites me is I see a lot of incredible solutions. Like operating in the ReFi space, you know, there's a lot of really incredible, interesting ideas, and actually translating that into how we can build these systems and make it actually work and have the technologies that support it, but also the people and the networks to make it scale. And so really for me, being very deeply cognizant of the challenges we face and the difficulties, but also trying to get into this solution space of how can we actually implement the things that are going to take us away from there, because I think there's a despondency and a kind of tendency to kind of capitulate and be like, you know,
what can I do?
It's almost there's a category of people who have gone from kind of denying or minimizing climate change to then going, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it anyway.
Sure. Whatever.
And it's like, well, okay, first you were denying or minimizing the effects and saying it's not as bad as you're alarmist or whatever it is. You know, climate skeptics have been thriving. And, you know, unfortunately, maybe it's something we see more of again. But yeah, it's actually, okay, well, can we actually just operate in the solution space? And first of all, we need to have a vision for the future, a positive vision.
Yes.
We see, I've seen this in sci-fi and in literature and in climate circles and this kind of thing. There's this quite destructive picture of the future, of this dystopian sort of cyberpunk world, which is dark and desolate and desertified, and there's advanced technology, but it's all, you know, leading to the...
It's tyrannical.
It's, dystopian. But for me, I love this idea of imagining a solarpunk future, you know, where actually advanced technologies are used in a way that actually creates high life and high human and ecological abundance and harmony. And there's a slightly sort of utopian feel to it, but it's also grounded in realism. It's grounded in practicality of how we can actually, a realistic vision of the future that is actually a positive scenario. So I think those kind of experiments are really important to imagine that, and then imagine, okay, what are the systems and the technologies and the things we need to build that get us towards or closer to that space.
And I think for me, out of the last 6 or 7 months, the emergence of artificial intelligence really does seem to capture this vehicle of the fourth industrial revolution. What you described in the past, these new tools, like we've gone through several evolutionary paradigms of effectively increasing our capacity to automate processes and to take resources from one form and turn them into another for the sake of productivity. And I find this quote interesting by Klaus Schwab, the chairman of WEF, earlier this year, of saying, like, those who control the technologies of this fourth industrial revolution will become the masters of this world. And that, to me, signifies that the existing institutions really do know that the entire foundation of our current society is being shaken. And they can feel the power structure is changing dramatically. And what I think is fascinating around this super cycle of artificial intelligence alongside climate is it really asks us to inquire, what does it mean to be human? If this machine is more effective at you than all of these things, if 25 to 50% of human jobs today are likely to be disrupted by AI within the next 5-7 years, then what does it mean to be human? What are we here for? Why do we exist in this, symphony of life? And on the other hand, if all of nature is being destroyed and we see ourselves in these concrete jungles locked into a mode of being that is, very clearly based upon what all the evidence suggests, very bad for us. What do we do with this? How do we control this? And I think the fascinating part around AI is, like, so much capital has gone away from almost any other innovation source straight into this thing. It's gathering attention. ChatGPT and Midjourney and DALL-E and all these other tools are just harnessing all of this attention because of the enormous creative power. And, I think it's really exciting because it does seem to me to be the key vector to actually say, hey, we now have the capital efficiency, we can hit these growth targets while also transitioning towards a regenerative society, because we don't need the power of fossil fuels per se to provide this productivity. We can use renewable energy as a source. With the compounding advances of artificial intelligence, we can fulfill these, so-called growth targets with these tools and actually transition towards taking care of nature that ultimately matters. And I think most people don't recognize how enormous this business opportunity is. We're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars being spent to maintain a stable climate as a core function of stable life on Earth. And this is many multiples of the US economy. And so I think we're going to witness a transition as these crises become worse and worse, away from, okay, what's the next tech thing, to recognizing, like, okay, this is so bad on Earth, we have to create, billion and trillion dollar businesses that can harness this transition. I'm curious to get your take on how you see that confluence of AI, of climate, and how the capital is going to be chasing after what's ultimately a story of human progress.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting threads that you've brought in there. One of the first things I want to touch on is about reimagining and redesigning these models of growth, right? Because I think it's so important in this conversation when we're talking about some of these incredibly powerful technologies and economic kind of confluence of these kind of systems. If we're still locked in the old growth models, I think there's a lot of problematic thinking of we can grow our way out of the climate crisis.
Right.
And it's like we need to redesign the economic system so that it's growing in the positive industries and declining in the extractive industries, and do it in a way that's obviously bringing those sectors with us, so that the people are not lost and so that it doesn't cause the social unrest.
Sure.
And so doing that requires these, obviously very well thought out regenerative models that's not just on the environmental side, but also on the economic and social and the cultural side as well.
Sure.
And obviously we love the work of Kate Raworth and Donut Economics. And the kind of key insight there is that we have a container that we need to be within the planetary boundaries, where you're in the donut, you're in this safe space where your needs are being met. If you're in the whole of the donut, your needs are not being met. But the key insight, I think, is that you can grow the donut through technology and through productivity and enhancements. The size of the pie can grow for everyone. And so I think these are the containers within which we should look at how we kind of channel this incredible technology
100%.
In those directions, right?
And it ultimately requires a new system of account. Because if you suddenly bring biodiversity onto the balance sheet, there's this whole new abundance that hasn't been accounted for. And so growth within the context of GDP is limited to what we currently determine to be valuable. And I think, society at large and economists are missing this entire universe of potential where we just start to create new value systems that really recognize life and nature as a fundamental value force for everything that we need to produce all of the other, non-living materials upon which society has been constructed. And as we're, increasing the complexity of human culture in our cities and the way that we build technology, we also need complex, diverse living systems to support this, because ultimately that's where it comes from. The economic castle in the sky, is really just a delusion. It all comes from physical matter. And I think for me that, one of the things around this trend in ReFi is a lot of people have moved past the Web3 space, just assuming it's a scam. Look at all of these things that have happened. Regulatory is super uncertain. But what I see is this actual deep necessity to use the principles and values of Web3 to ensure that the emergence of artificial intelligence is for and by the people. Because if you look at, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and the US and China, these really are the power horse institutions that are harnessing this incredible extractive power. And if we don't use decentralized systems to control and govern this, where's the money going to go? Into a increasingly, select elite group of people who are mostly male, who are mostly white, who often don't have the best intentions of large society at whole, and actually, frankly, are dreaming of an exit plan anyway. So I don't know what your thought is on, do you think Web3 is, an important vector for AI, or where does this overlap happen?
Yeah, I think it's a really important take. And if we look at the kind of early aspirations of the internet era, of this kind of liberating, democratizing, anti-capitalist force, and we look at how that's actually played out, and we see basically the largest hierarchies that have ever existed in human history of a few CEOs and shareholders literally controlling the algorithms that influence billions of people around the world. And those algorithms are geared towards attention and profit at the expense of all of the other externalities and the kind of harm that that's caused. And we've only just we haven't even dealt with those impacts before we now have this even greater disruption with AI coming around the corner. It's here. And if we have the same models of it being the same ownership structures, then I think that's, again, we're heading towards even greater catastrophe in that sense. So I think exploring models of more democratic and participatory ownership and distributed and open source large language models and how we kind of create these systems, it's hard. But luckily, I think the Web3 space has been experimenting with this and there have been some wild experiments, don't get me wrong, and a lot has been learned. But it's kind of like, if you view the Web3 space as this evolutionary organism where the keystone species of the fundamental breakthroughs in coordination technology that enable these more decentralized, participatory, democratic systems, those are the ones that hopefully live on and survive the bull and the bear, and the speculators come and go. And so I think we're sort of just really seeing the fruits of that, I think, with some of these kind of more sophisticated models and technologies and things that are emerging. But it's now a sense of how can we kind of break beyond the bubble and really start to use those things in a wider context to actually do the work and kind of break out from theory to practice. So hopefully that's what some of the stuff we can explore on the pod.
That's what's up, man.
And
we've covered a lot of ground here looking at these kind of super cycles of AI and climate. And I think Web3 as a coordination tool presents a lot of promise, but ultimately it's lacking if it doesn't have purpose. And I think this is where storytelling as a coordination vehicle is so vastly underrated. I saw a tweet from somebody recently saying, how long is it going to take until Web3 people realize it's all about the storytellers? And this has been a big inspiration behind what we're doing at Source Studios, is really leaning into story and narrative. And I'd love to give just a quick take and an offering and an exploration of a story that we're kind of seeing emerging in our local communities here. And recognizing that in the same way the Black Plague sort of stimulated the Renaissance, we've had COVID-19 draw people inside, physically and metaphorically. And so many people are reevaluating their lives. And out of this, we see this kind of regenerative renaissance emerging that recognizes, actually, you know what? We need a new story about what it means to be human, of what actually matters. All of the economic systems that have been designed are predicated upon the premise that we're separate individuals driven by, rational self-interests. But what if we're actually not separate? What if we're both an individual and a whole, the drop and the ocean? And what if that we're not just a random ball of mass, but what if we were actually born to belong? It's a core part of our physiology is to be in relationship with one another. Maybe actually AI really invites us to do what only we can uniquely do, what we are specifically as people gifted in doing in our creative power and potential. And I think I love that phrase of you saying that we have all the tools that we need because yes, these tools can increase the extractive potential of corporations, but they also give us everything we could ever imagine to create this world, this better future. And the money is here. It's searching for returns. Yes, we're in a recession and yes, it's constricted, but there's vast sums of capital that is seeking for impact. It's just we haven't really created the financial instruments that actually harness this promise of a regenerative future. And so this for me seems to be kind of an emerging narrative and framing, but I'm curious what your take is on like, what are the core ideas and what are the core mental models that need to be disseminated in order for us to realize this vision of a regenerative Earth?
To really understand this regenerative paradigm and how it, for me, represents the next evolution of human society, organization, economics, and where the whole new world order needs to go in order to create a future that's not just sustaining the current paradigm that we have, but actually creating systems that are building resource capacity, like actually improving.
Yep.
And so this, I think, is a really nice mental model because we can see that over time, where the degenerative systems are leading us, we see it on the TV and we see it increasingly, and we imagine that happening, in 100 years, the kind of potential for that is quite frankly terrifying. And so can we not only build systems that are sustainable, but actually regenerative and improving the world as we go on? So you give it 100 years and we can maybe reach that solar punk future or a version of it. We're not even at sustainable yet. We're still at extractive. So we've got a lot of work to do. But luckily, we have got some really interesting tools, of course. And another one of these models is actually looking at wealth in a much more holistic way. Of course, our current systems are just built on GDP, financial capital, and all else. And externalities are a completely separate thing. What if we used some of these incredible coordination tools, economic systems, to actually incentivize and coordinate the generation of living capital, of cultural capital, experiential, intellectual, spiritual, social, and material? And really seeing this wealth holistically and putting the models that actually make it happen. And so that's a really interesting area of exploration. Another one is this idea that when everyone thinks of regeneration, we think of the environmental side, which is great. You imagine the degraded land regenerating and it being abundant, rich nature. But we've also got to recognize that it's also a social and an economic movement as well. So the principles of regenerative economics are economic systems that don't extract wealth and power to the top over time, but instead distribute it more evenly over a network in a way that leads to the strength and resilience of that economic network and actually values all of the participants within it in a fair way. And of course, the social systems of actually what do we need to be whole as humans, to work through and be supported and have diversity and inclusion and positive culture and all of these kind of things is a hugely important part. So again, seeing regeneration in this holistic.
And I think the social side is very interesting because a lot of our society is built upon the industrial model of work. We work 9 to 5 or even longer hours, 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and we're absolutely exhausted because all the resources within us have been extracted for the assembly line, so to speak. And then we have to seek dopamine in other things through alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, which is even furthering the consumptive capacity of our species. And we're caught in this cycle, this constant pursuit of escaping our current condition because we're miserable, because we've put ourselves into a machine, effectively, but we're not. We're biological beings, and we are intimately and infinitely related to all of life around us. And when we're separate from nature and from others, we suffer. And so what if actually our society could be rebuilt knowing the advances and the potential of AI to take care of so many of the mundane tasks that humans aren't really fit to do? And if we can create a society and a culture that's regenerative by nature because we're not expelling all of the energy of our being into this pursuit of something else. I think there's enormous potential in, regenerative societies to really pave the way to this, new Earth that we all need to survive, frankly.
So I think understanding those kind of core theoretical concepts of regeneration, well, how do we actually make it practical and make it tangible and actually deliver it? Well, for me, this is the ReFi space, right? This is what we're here to do, is to actually build these new regenerative systems, take the theory into practice, and then actually channel people and resources into those systems with the right kind of incentive structures, the right governance structures, organizational structures that actually generate this outcome that we want to see, the diverse forms of capital, the holistic wealth, and the vision of a solar punk society. So that, for me, is what the ReFi space is all about. And we have some incredibly powerful building blocks to work upon. Of course, we've got all of the amazing work in sustainability, regenerative economics, and thinking, and the academic work that goes behind it. We have the tools that have been built in decentralized finance for how we create more automated, removing middlemen, power to the people kind of financial systems. Now the emerging tools of artificial intelligence and MRV, advanced measurement, reporting and verification of IoT sensors to actually know what's going on the ground, so we can have verifiable facts and information about the impact that's being created, combined with robust scientific methodologies and also decentralized scientific movement that opens up the accessibility of the scientific minds around the world to actually have new pathways into creation of academic knowledge and disrupting the kind of maybe more elitist kind of scientific pathways that are excluded to many. And then all of that being built on this distributed ledger Web3 kind of substrate that really acts as the kind of coordination layer of a transparent digital infrastructure
that people can
that's
actually
owned
trust
by the people.
Yes.
And that's the kind of substrate that then is able to coordinate all of these different blocks.
Totally.
And so I think that's kind of, for me, the vision, and hopefully that gets us to somewhere a better place. But we've got a lot of work to do, and let's explore some of the amazing people who are making this happen, and excited to.
Dude, yeah, super stoked. And I'd love just to give a bit of a framework, because in season 3, we're going much more into the work that we're doing at ReFi DAO. We're featuring startups outside of the ReFi DAO network, or within the community. But I think it's important for people just to have a grasp of actually, the long-term vision and also the scale and potential of what we're doing. We haven't really spent any time on ReFi Podcast about ReFi DAO, really. We touched on it a little bit last episode, but, it was really the home of this movement of potential, saying, hey, Web3 provides a critical coordination mechanism to solve these complex existential crises. And at Toucan, I met founders trying to use that same infrastructure, not just for carbon, but for plastic removal and for land and all types of other environmental assets. And we gathered founders with Daryl Edwards into founder circles, frankly, just creating a safe space for people to coordinate and collaborate. We supported, a bunch of the top entrepreneurs in the space as they raised significant sums of capital. We hosted conversations with ReFi Podcast and reached tens of thousands of listeners. But we also had this stream of decentralized events all over the world through ReFi Spring. Thanks to the support of Climate Collective and Cello Foundation, we're able to reach thousands of people, primarily in the global south, with this new story of regeneration and giving people mobile-first technology to say, you can get involved. It's actually really easy. It's in the palm of your hands. And so here we have now the kind of confluence of all of these different organizations at ReFi DAO saying, what really is this new thing? And what we're kind of playing with now is this idea of a network society or a coordination. There's different names that this can be framed within, but this idea of this online community gathering locally to take action and do the work of regeneration. Yes, we have these amazing digital tools, but if they're not being deployed on the ground, in the soil, in the flesh, it doesn't really make a difference. And a lot of the Web3 space is kind of suffering from this abstraction from reality. And we want to provide anchors to the local communities and the local institutions that really need to see these new economic models as a viable way forward for their constituents. Because at the end of the day, they've got to have trust, they've got to have faith. And so while a lot of the bear market is providing a significant disparity of resources, we're actually using this time to lay an essential foundation for a new infrastructure. And if you want to just bear with me for a second and imagine this future where in every major city around the world, people are gathering regularly and almost creating a type of village of 150 to 1,000 people, even more, who are meeting regularly with this vision of regeneration in mind, and could even bake unconditional basic income into the fabric of this economic system, where we have GDP as the kind of penultimate goal of our existing institutions. What if taking care of all of our basic needs was the penultimate goal of this new bottom-up grassroots society? I know there's a lot to go into there, but the fact is we actually do have existing currencies with Cello stablecoins that are stable assets backed by nature. And if we can begin to blend these local regenerative economies with a currency that is driving demand for regeneration, we can start to see large-scale systemic, change happening just because of capital flows, and simply because the money itself is conscious, is effectively aware of its impact on the planet, and is baking into its mechanism design a store of value for future generations, because that's really what nature is providing. And I love what you said earlier around this idea of like open source large language models, because for me, I think that AI is essential to this transition. We need capital efficiency and we need 10x reduction in costs all across the board in order to make this transition. But if we let it be captured by OpenAI and Google and Microsoft, it's not really going to go to these local communities on the ground. It's just going to accentuate the wealth disparity. So I personally would love to see the Web3 space getting into this idea of open source large language models that can be contextualized to the bioregion, having knowledge of the soil contents, of the air, of the atmospheric data, really baking it into that sense of place, and then giving the people the upside as the model grows and becomes more efficient and maybe exports knowledge to other models in other places. And I think for me, this idea of local community-owned and governed systems really does have the most potential. And I know during my time at OpenGov, working for city and state governments in the U.S., we do need fundamentally new infrastructure to make this possible because the existing systems just don't work. I think there's a lot to be said there. There's a lot of things that we can go into, but ultimately, it's been so inspiring seeing these local communities prop up. And I'm curious what you've seen as you've traveled. I mean, you've been to quite a few. You went to Hong Kong. You've obviously been to Paris. Like you've seen the emergence of these local nodes prop up. Like what are you seeing in the tapestry of these local communities that are sprouting up with this vision of regeneration?
Yeah, it's really interesting how each one I think has a totally different flavor to it, because it's such a contextual kind of architecture of allowing these autonomous communities to surface, and each one has their own vision of regeneration and how they're going to create impact and formulate. So I did go all the way out to Hong Kong. It was an incredible experience. We've seen as the US has been floundering around with its not quite working out how it's going to regulate or actually have productive way of engaging with these technologies.
Sure.
We've seen Hong Kong look at that as an opportunity to go, okay, how can we actually start to create the regulatory frameworks here that enable that? There's some really interesting work going on there, and I know the community there is really looking to engage with ESG and impact, climate, finance and professionals to really bring them into this ReFi regenerative paradigm, and seeing how they can build the bridges between those two kind of worlds, which will be very interesting to see how that emerges. And on the other side of it, you have the more kind of grassroots local nodes, which are more community-based, place-based, experience and bottoms-up kind of energy, whether it's like a regenerative village or co-working space or and these kind of things, allowing for experimentation and community and social relationships and these kind of things emerge. And it's been a wonderful experience out here in Lisboa to see the awesome community that is here. And we had a magical event on Saturday, which started the day with lots of interesting and thought-stimulating kind of explorations into regeneration and this technology, interwoven with some awesome facilitated workshops and open space technology and liberating structures, all of this, and ending it with a cacao ceremony on the roof with a beautiful view and some dancing, which I found it magical and really rejuvenating, and to see kind of the social connections being built is really important. So for me, what I'm excited about as well is seeing how over time these communities can interweave and become mutually interdependent, and really seeing how we can form a cohesive whole and culture and society from the emerging autonomous decentralized network.
Dude, it's so exciting. And I think what you described there at the event is just the beginning of a bridge between two incredibly powerful cultures. You have the finance, you have the crypto, you have like the tech-driven, somewhat masculine power of, transmuting ideas into reality through capital and through bits. And then you have the very earthy, grounded, real, somewhat more feminine earth that is of soil and of water and of, physical presence. And to bring these two together with the combination of intellectual conversations, but also the invitation to do regeneration within, I think is essential. And, Lisbon, we're meeting every month. Come hang out and gather. If you're here for a conference, hit us up. And really, this is just a single drop amidst so many other cities with a Gitcoin round every quarter that we're using to support the formation of these local nodes, and ultimately want to see each of these local communities running their own grant programs, using quadratic funding to support the emergence of a regenerative economy. And just a quick glimpse, we'll do an episode with ReFi Lisboa, but we've just seen this fascinating concept of people in this city wanting to offer their space, wanting to offer their time to this emerging society, and almost imagining a kind of class pass for regeneration emerge in every city around the world where these regenerative communities are gathering, because there is this sense of abundance and sense of prosperity of like, yeah, of course, I'd love to host dinners at my house, or I'd love to open up, my co-working space for this purpose. I'd love